Hello friends, this is Growl. It's time that we have a talk about dungeon difficulty in the War Within. I've been watching a lot of videos, getting ready for the expansion, trying to see, what sorts of things people are talking about, what people are asking, and I really think it's time that we talk about dungeon difficulty and that the fact that people are going to be in for a rude awakening if they have the wrong mindset going into the War Within. They've made a lot of changes across the board in terms of timers, difficulties, mechanics, and I just want to go through all of this and talk to you guys real quick about exactly what's happening and hopefully helping you understand that when you're going into this expansion, you shouldn't really have a mindset of having expectations or like deserving to be at certain key levels or whatever, because things are going to be a lot different. So first, I want to talk about progression curves and the current dungeon progression. So this is the change that they made at the end of Dragonflight. I know some of you know about this, but I want to talk about this, and it is important, and I will get into why it's important after. So currently, what most people are used to, unless you played the end of Dragonflight, is this progression curve right here. You have normal dungeons and heroics, then you go into M0. M0 goes, in time difficulty all the way up to 20s. However, this kind of got ridiculous with how many levels there were. Also, this sort of content right here became trivialized very quickly. You only really did it while you were gearing up or in the very early weeks of the patch, and it sort of like created this rift of weird stuff that wasn't really relevant. So what they did is they basically removed heroic difficulty and moved it up. So now there's normal, which is, easy mode / leveling dungeons. And then you go right into M0 and then, or M0, but it's now heroic, right? So this already is going to be a big change. And then the next jump up is all the way up here in M0. And what's really nice about this is M0 has no affixes and is untimed. So you're essentially getting this difficulty of content. However, you are not pressured by a timer or affixes, and you can just restart dungeons at your will and practice things. So this will be a great way for people to get their foot in the door and start to learn some harder stuff, or just, in general, be able to do it without that pressure. However, you do have to keep in mind that this difficulty shift happened, right? You have M0 is now going to be considerably harder out the gate than Mythic Plus is. And so now you have Mythic Plus here. It ranges a much shorter range of keys, and each jump is going to be more meaningful. So a lot of people are saying, why isn't Mythic Plus available on the first week? And this is why. Because in the first week, generally it's only this first half block of M Plus that's available, and they limit the amount of rewards that you get up here because they don't want to trivialize the raid. And now, because M0 is so much more difficult, nobody, I don't want to say nobody, but very few people are going to be doing this, or, also these rewards are very, very good. The rewards, even from a +2 or a +3, is going to be significant compared to what it was before. And to help put this into perspective, if you aren't super familiar with all the difficulties, I drew some lines here and I sort of made my own copy of the chart. And I'm going to call this like, what I would estimate to be the progression curve. So this is assuming that everything lines up exactly how they say, which it sort of does. This is what you'd expect. So normal and heroic dungeons, if you're not super familiar with difficulties in WoW, this is essentially only stuff you do at the very beginning while you're leveling up your guy, maybe right when you hit max level and you want to get a little bit of items before you do anything significant. But in general, these difficulties are very, very difficult to fail. There's no loss conditions. Sometimes you end up with some questionable groups, but for the most part, this is kind of like training wheels, right? So now you have, when I talked about this week 1 experience of heroic and mythic zeros, this is essentially like the first level of challenging content that you do. And honestly, it's only really challenging because your gear is so bad and you're a fresh 60, but you outgear this content very quickly. So then for the average person, their progression level is going to be from that level all the way up to what used to be a mythic plus 15 here. This is the Keystone Master achievement, I believe, and this is where you get the rewarded mount. And so a lot of times this is a very common stopping point for people. And also I want to point out that pretty much anybody can reach this level of progression. I wouldn't say that you need a serious commitment to the game. You don't need an organized team or a guild. All it takes is just a little bit of practice and improving your gameplay, and pretty much anybody can get to this level. This is sort of like the casual progression. Like, you're not taking the season too serious, but you do want to, you know, get your mounts and get your achievements or whatever. Now you see where this might get a little bit messy here is this level right here is going to be fairly difficult if you're a casual player, and you're mostly going to want to like over gear this. So previously there was a little bit of a smoother transition here, but this is going to be a very big jump to go from heroic to M0s. So previously on week 1, M0s were you know, if you had a team of players that played together that knew the mechanics, you would still wipe sometimes, but for the most part, M0s were pretty easy, and then that's what's heroic's going to be. And then as you get into this, you know, more along the right, you're going to get things that are more and more difficult. So M0, this is going to be fairly difficult for people. And I'm going to go into some numbers to get even more specifics to help people understand. Because I think people are looking at Mythic plus 10s and they're thinking, this is easy. I know this. I'm doing this right now, or I'm doing M0s or M2s or whatever on live. And I want to show you why that isn't the case. And then, so now going into moderate progression. So this right here is where you receive, I believe, the Keystone Hero achievement and the portals that you get for each dungeon. So this is kind of a more end game reward for people, and this I wouldn't say is that difficult to maintain, but you know, let's say 25% of the players reach here, which again, it's not super crazy to be in the top 25%. I'd say maybe like somewhere between 10 and 5% here. And I'm rounding up a little bit because I assume, you know, I'm not counting people that, you know, do one dungeon and quit or whatever. I'm talking about people that actually interact with Mythic Plus. So, you know, this is like a more serious but still obtainable goal. And then once we get into here, this is just people that really enjoy Mythic Plus, and we're not really going to talk too much about here. So the last thing I want to point out about this progression curve is a lot of people are worried about the depletion penalty. Blizzard recently added a minus 15 additional seconds when you when you die in a key, making deaths more punishing. And a lot of people are talking about how this is going to be really, really tough for pugs. This is going to make early week key pushing more difficult. So keep in mind, this only comes into play right here at the 17 previously or 7 level. So this is very high up in the progression curve, and for the most part, a lot of your journey in gearing up and getting better, you're not going to have to worry about this death timer thing at all. This is only for the very last home stretch, which I think is actually, you know, I'm going to wait and see how it plays out, but I'm anticipating that it's actually a reasonable change. So here we are. We have a big jump here. We have these sort of levels marked out. Why is this relevant? So I'm going to bring out this spreadsheet, and this guy's videos is sort of what inspired me to do this, because he's a guy who pugs a lot. His name is One Azeroth TV or Metro. He pugs a lot of keys, and he's known for always streaming and recording every single key that he does. It's awesome for science, and that you can see exactly, like, you know, everything, right? What's cool about this is I can go back and look at every single key that he's done throughout Dragonflight. This is going to be a little bit of a flashbang, so I'm going to pull this up here. This is Metro's keys that he's doing currently, right? You can see this is only a couple days ago. So you can see the level that he plays at. He's doing 17s, 18s, mixed bag of results, but, you know, clearly capable of timing 17s and 18s. Even, you know, weeks ago, this isn't all pre-patch stuff. So this is well out of the zones that we were talking about, right? And so I think a lot of people are going to be in these zones thinking that the expansion launch is going to be very comfortable for them, they're going to be anticipating going into the expansion, trying to be able to time at the very least plus 10s or something. Not Metro specifically, he's been around the block a long time. I think he knows plenty about pugs, but I think a lot of people who are in this zone right now, especially this zone, is at very big risk. People who are doing 14s, 13s to be in for a rude awakening. So, first of all, this is very, very late into the season and very late into the expansion. So let's talk about now the very beginning of this season, okay? So this is week 1 of season 4 with the new changes, the first area that we got, right? And we can see here, he upgrades a 2, upgrades a 5, and gets into the 9 and 10 range. This is where things start to get rocky. But again, at the very least, you know, this is day 1, day 2 of the patch. So already day 2 of the patch, we're putting up some plus 10s for completion to get gear. Here's day 3. And you can see eventually by the end of the week here, we're able to chest and complete 10s for the max level gear upgrade with somewhat consistency. And this is, I think, what a lot of people are going to expect to be able to do, right? And, you know, again, Metro is a reason, you know, he's doing pretty high keys right now compared to, like, the average person, especially someone who's just jumping into the new expansion. But what I want to point out here is that this is season 4, okay? So now I'm going to move towards season 1. So now this is season 1 keys, and I know this might get a little confusing, but this is before the key squish. So keep in mind, a 10 is the equivalent to an M0 or close, and a 20 is an equivalent to a 10. So now let's look back at this progression, right? And this is the same player, and he's been playing for a while. It's not like he was a noob on this season. So he's starting off at a 2, he's chesting it, getting up to a 10, and already at a 12, we have a completion, another 12 disband. So this is out of his first 12, 11, 12, 11, 12, 12, right? So out of these first 6 keys that he's done, he's depleted 5 of them, and he's timed 1. And now this is the equivalent of +2 and +3 level, right? So this is a guy who's in, you know, probably in the upwards of, you know, the 1 to 2% of players range. And he is depleting 5 out of 6 keys that would be the equivalent of a +2 or a +3 on day 1. And hopefully you guys understand the implications of this, right? This is very, very different from this, right? Of pushing all the way up to +10s and then eventually getting into, which is the equivalent of 20s, right? The beginning of an expansion when everyone's gearing up is significantly more difficult than the others. And so now you see, this is what his week 1 is going to be like, right? And if you, I guess I could have copied this spreadsheet and tried and converted these key levels, but you can see here that the equivalent skill level, even for a very good tank, is going to be stuck. Like, this is M0. You're going to be an M0 on the first couple days. You're not going to be able to just push up 2, 4, 6, right? And so just to put it into perspective again, so now here's day 2. Day 2 of the season. Now we're able to do +2s, +3s, +4s, still depleting. I mean, we're still, you know, again, these are some of the harder dungeons, right? You can see he's trying to get this is like, there's gonna be overtuned dungeons, right? You can see him trying to get a ruby life pools in time because this is probably a key that he needed, and he has 5, 6, 7. I mean, this is a hard key at launch, right? And there's gonna be these hard keys at launch. And so this is, you know, keys that are in this range. And so now we're okay, so we're looking for the 20th, right? So this is the 20th, and we're still not at that range of timing 20s, right? So this is the end of the first week, and we haven't gotten to these 20s yet. And so, and this is a guy who's, again, close to 1 to 2% player, not able to pug up into getting in the max rewards. So if you're going into the, like, this is the equivalent of a +7. These are +7s, +8s that we're disbanding and we're depleting on the first week, even the very end of the week after we've gotten all this gear. So I just want everyone to sort of go, you know what I mean? You might be doing, like, I know this is looking a little bit weird because of the key level squish, but you know, this is the equivalent of doing 27s, 26s, 25s, right, currently. But if you go into the first week, you're going to be depleting keys that are like +7s, +8s, and it's gonna be fairly difficult. And I just want to, you know, shift everyone's mindset back a little bit, that this is a totally new system in terms of how the difficulty is going to work. And, you know, get ready for it. Don't be frustrated in pugs. Be nice to people. Spend some time to learn. It is what it is. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I think this is also important too, is just the overall difficulty of dungeons, like mechanic wise. So dungeons right now, there are, especially the newer dungeons in this season, are very, very difficult, and there's some very tough bosses. People are going to be wiping to these bosses, and it's going to take time to learn these. So in Shadowlands, you know, I was making videos and talking about dungeons during the beta of that. I was talking about the mechanical complexity and, you know, how Shadowlands dungeons are stepping stuff up and making things more difficult. Now we're revisiting Shadowlands dungeons, and we're seeing the developers add more difficult mechanics and make these dungeons even harder than they were back in Shadowlands. If that isn't the most obvious sort of example of difficulty creep from expansion to expansion, I mean, we're literally taking dungeons that I said were hard, and we're making them even harder. Granted, Mists of Tir Scythe, not known to be one of the most mechanically complex dungeons, but you get my point in that having to add a bunch of mechanics to these dungeons that, you know, it's not like we're talking about Cataclysm. You know, I would understand having to add some depth to Grim Batol or something, but to have to add depth to Mists of Tir Scythe, something that, you know, we were playing less than 3 or 4 years ago, is a little bit wild. So I'm going to go over this boss. This boss is going to be absolutely farming you guys in pugs, and you will think back to this video if you've made it this far. First of all, thank you. And while you're getting farmed by this boss, the mechanical complexity of some of these bosses and the coordination required is pretty insane. Now, granted, again, this is a high key level. This is not something that I'd expect people to be doing on the first week. And I'm not saying I'm the best because I can do this, because we're on the PTR and we're at pretty high level gear that is way better than what we would have on the first week. So the way this boss works is it sends out these shards that you have to kill, and it sucks in the shards after some time and creates a big shield, and then you have to break the shield. And there's a lot of moving parts here. So first of all, the boss sends out these shards. As I mentioned, when it hits the tank, it lands these out. Now, each one of these shards has very little health. You see, this is less than 1% of the boss's health. And when you kill a shard, it blows up on your party, right? You see that damage? And every time you kill a shard, it's a stacking. Look at that. See, now it's 2. Look at how much damage just killing 2 of those shards did, even with very, very high gear. Now, I'm a Evoker, so I press 1 button and I top it. Another level of complexity here is the unstable energy. So now, while you're in the fight, these unstable energy orbs drop, and you can collect them to get a stacking buff that increases your shield damage and your healing. So in general, you want somebody to be grabbing these to break the shield, and having somebody to heal, your healer, to be able to heal through stuff. So you see right away, I grabbed the first 2. Here comes some more crystals. We need to keep breaking these to ensure that the shield is small. I'm using the heal buff to try and maintain high health on my party. We're killing them one by one and communicating what defensives to use. And so now the boss is going to use its shield. Now our enhancement shaman is collecting a bunch of these orbs and using their defensives in order to help break the shield. And you can see how much coordination and decision making and pre-planning is going into this. And look at how much damage our party is taking. And again, we had a very deliberate plan here, and we had bloodlust rolling, so that shield was, you know, didn't look too scary. But hopefully you get my point of trying to imagine how you would do this dungeon in a random pug. And yeah, there's going to be some wipes here. This is going to be very, very difficult. So And my point wasn't trying to say Blizzard needs to make the game easier or anything. My point is just to warn people coming back to the game, because I know a lot of times when a new expansion comes out, a lot of people want to return and see how things are going. And I actually think that the game is in a really, really fun state right now. One of the things that Blizzard has done well is respecting your time a lot more, and you can just sort of jump into these dungeons that could potentially be very, very difficult, and there's a lot of end game depth to WoW right now. But you know, you have to have this expectation that this stuff could be very, very hard, you know, whereas normally you would spend a bunch of time grinding island expeditions and stupid stuff. You can do whatever you want, and Blizzard is giving you this ability to go into a +2, a +3, a +4 very, very early with very, very low gear. But it's going to be scary. It's going to be really, really scary, and it's attacking on all fronts was my message, right? We have the issue that they're doing the key level squish, so the key level is going to feel a little bit off from what you're used to. We have the beginning of the expansion gearing that's, you know, slower than you're used to. Everyone's sort of gearing up, they're just hitting max level. It's not like it was in an in-between season. And you have this complexity or mechanic or difficulty creep. You know, every single expansion's dungeons get more and more complex. So hopefully I didn't come across as a doomer here or trying to you know, scare people or anything. My main message is just that things are going to be very, very different at the start of the expansion in terms of doing dungeons, and dungeon difficulty might throw you off. And I want you to go into it with reasonable expectations, and, you know, don't necessarily think that you should be at a level or you deserve to be at a level, or don't be frustrated if you're getting stuck at, you know, a +3 key, for example, and when you think that you should be able to do a +10 or whatever, because, you know, some of the best players in the world right now who are doing crazy high keys are depleting +12s and +3s on the beta constantly with even really, really good gear. So that was a little bit of a elongated yap about dungeons. I will be working on some dungeon guides for the newer stuff and a whole lot more M+ related videos, but I thought this was a very, very interesting topic that I kind of wanted to talk about and share my thoughts on it. So I appreciate you guys watching again. Call me wrong or whatever in the comments. I still appreciate you for making it this long, and good luck in the next expansion. Happy keying, friends.